Every now and again, we find a very holy person or a very inspired person with, shall we say, to say the least, a very tumultuous spouse. For example, we have the book of the prophet Hosea, a holy man, prophet of the Lord, gave very fiery prophecies, but part of his prophecy was he married a prostitute. At the obedience of God, the command of God, but Gomer was noted for being the very unfaithful wife of Hosea. Many of us are familiar with the film Braveheart with Mel Gibson, William Wallace. And if even we are at least familiar with it, we know that for a great deal of the medieval history of England and Scotland, the two countries were at war with each other, with various sporadic invasions and counter-invasions between the two nations. And at the time of William Wallace, it was almost old hat to those two countries. But that was really nothing new. A couple hundred years before, there was a king of Scotland named Malcolm III, who began this campaign of invasion against England, leading to an animosity between the two countries that lasted for a couple hundred years. Probably there was at least a rivalry between the two countries until King James I from Scotland came to replace Queen Elizabeth I because she died with no heirs. But Malcolm III was a very warlike king. However, his wife is the saint we celebrate today. A very holy woman with a, shall we say, tumultuous spouse. Margaret of Scotland was born in Hungary, but eventually married King Malcolm III of Scotland. And in the midst of those trying times of war, she was noted for her charity to the poor and her promotion of Christianity against what paganism remained in Scotland. She became a great model of a compassionate Christian queen who used her position, if not her political influence as queen, for the betterment of those in need. And she is honored today as the patroness of Scotland. While we remember such warlords as William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, we also remember Margaret of Scotland, not as a warlord, but as a patroness of the poor and those in need. And we see in her and others like her examples of holiness that come not from the common person, not from the poor, not from the religious leadership, but from the political leadership, the royalty of her time, where her political leadership was a springboard from which she manifested the gospel and her care for the poor, in contrast to her husband, who used his political leadership to make war on an enemy. Is perhaps something that the political leaders of our day can learn from. Those who profess a Catholic faith and yet use their political position as an excuse to triangulate themselves from that faith. There are probably very, very many examples of Catholic leaders throughout history who are guilty of this. But every now and again we have such saints as Margaret of Scotland, Elizabeth of Hungary, St. Louis of France, who were political leaders, albeit kings and queens, but nonetheless saw their position of leadership, dominance, as also a position of service in the name of the gospel. So on this day, let us pray for those political leaders who serve the people around the world, but especially in this country. And especially those political leaders who profess our Catholic faith. In particular in this country, when a political leader says that his Catholic faith underlies realize the leadership he provides, he's usually attacked for it. The alternative are those political leaders who say, I can't impose my faith. I have to remain neutral. I have to remain indifferent. I have to remain separated from that faith. And of course, it amounts to nothing less, in many cases, than a betrayal of their own people, their own community of faith, when they do this. Let us see in Margaret of Scotland an example of true political holiness. And let us pray for our political leaders, especially those who are a part of our Catholic faith. They have an awesome responsibility to lead, to represent, and to ensure the common good and justice in our society. But let us pray that they do not use their political position as an excuse to separate themselves from the faith. But that, like Margaret of Scotland, they recognize their faith as a call for them to use their political leadership as a springboard to live examples of that faith in the midst of their position and leadership